Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with another episode for you. Sorry for no episodes over the last couple weeks. It's just been really busy with Christmas and all that. But with that, I want to wish you guys all a happy holidays. Obviously, it's been Christmas for me, but I just haven't. By the time I've gotten like all of the film stuff I want to do done, it's been like Saturday, and there really hasn't been much time for me to record or get an episode out. Recounting, I guess, the what was it, the Bears game and then the Falcons game before. No, the Falcons game was probably the last episode that I did. No, it was actually previewing the Falcons game was the last episode I did. So yeah, missed Kirk's return, which was inglorious for Kirk. Obviously, he's been benched since. Missed the second Bears game. I don't think it was so much different from the first Bears game that there's really so much going on there. But we're going to dive in to reviewing the Seahawks game and then give a preview of the second Packers game that the Vikings have this year, obviously. So, really excited for it. Happy holidays to everybody out there. And let's jump into the episode. So, starting with the Seahawks, honestly, I think the defense to me was a little bit more maybe of the story of the game, right? Because they had some ups and downs. But I actually wasn't really all that upset with the defensive performance overall. So on like the Seahawks side of the ball, they basically didn't run the ball throughout the course of the game. They had a couple successes, but for the most part, the Vikings were able to plug them up. They had one, what would have been a really nice goal line stand until the Seahawks ended up scoring a touchdown. But really, the coverage, I think, and the Seahawks' ability to move the ball through the air is more of the story of the game. I think Geno had something like 43 pass attempts, right? So the first thing that popped out to me throughout the course of the game, and this has been a theme for the Vikings going back weeks at this point, probably to like the Titans game or maybe the Jaguars game, where they're playing a lot more man coverage on third downs. And I think it was really, really successful for the Vikings in this game overall. So the Seahawks went, I think, like 2 for 11 or 2 for 10 or something on third down. I think they did convert a third down on a Stephon Gilmore DPI that I didn't agree with. Okay, so I didn't get a chance to watch this game live. That's how busy I've been just with family things. But just from the tape, right, from the All 22, I really didn't agree with the DPI on Stephon Gilmore that got and I think it was on a scoring drive for the Seahawks. Maybe it was a field goal attempt. I don't know. But it really just was kind of a ticky tack call. I thought they were both hand fighting a little bit there to me. But outside of that, I thought they were pretty much locked down on third downs. You saw good man coverage. There was one earlier in the game where I think Tyler Lockett was on Byron Murphy. Lockett catches the ball, but he's behind the sticks, right? And it's like a 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. So you have to be playing pretty tight coverage to be able to stop guys from converting in those situations. I really think that the ability to play man in those cases and heat them up with pressure a little bit has been pretty impressive. Uh, and one thing that I think is interesting with the way the Vikings are playing man coverage, and they did a number of different things in this game, and in some cases it might be hard to tell, right? Because if you get a different presentation in the offense, you might do different things as a defense, right? So if you're trying to play like a one double coverage, right, where it's a safety over the top of, in this case for the Seahawks, it'd probably be DK Metcalf, right? And you're trying to kind of bracket DK Metcalf. If he comes out in the 3 receiver set, it might just look like 2-man, right, where you have 2 deep safeties. But for the most part, I think they were playing a lot of 2-man in this game. I don't think they were bracketing DK Metcalf, but there's also something the Vikings do that I think is pretty, I don't know if it's unique, but it's not something that I'm all that used to seeing, in that when they play man coverage, they'll a lot of times blitz 5, right? So they'll have Blake Cashman, they'll have their 4-down lineman. It's usually on 3rd down, so they usually have their sub package in, right, with Grenard, Jihad Ward, and Jihad Ward's really the key, right? And it's like Pat Jones, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Dallas Turner, like 2 of those 3 guys, right? It's kind of inconsistent on who's in on those reps, but so they blitz all 5 of those guys, and then really there's not a second zone defender, right? So you have a deep safety as your deep option, and then you don't really have a second zone defender, right? All 5 other coverage players are blitzing 5, so 6 players left. All 5 other coverage players are in man coverage. But a lot of times in those cases, it really looks like the Vikings are dropping the running back who's leaking out of the backfield. And that's not really the case. They let the running back run free, and a lot of times when you blitz in man coverage on a third down, you're sending what's called a green dog blitz, right? So if you're the linebacker, if you're Blake Cashman, you're blitzing at the quarterback if the running back stays back in pass protection. In this case, the Vikings are blitzing Cashman regardless, and they're actually covering the running back with the deep safety who starts at like 10 plus yards of depth, right? He's like way deeper downfield, supposed to cover a running back leaking out of the backfield. And they do this with their rat coverage as well, right? So man coverage across the board, you have a single high safety. You also have Cashman as a zone dropper in the middle of the field, right? He's the rat. If it's a safety coming down, he's the robber. But the rat coverage, they will still use the safety and man coverage on the back coming from way depth. So if you look at it, in a lot of cases, it looks like the rat's ignoring the back coming out of the backfield. And then also there's nobody really covering that back, but really it's a safety coming from depth, but he's also watching the quarterback's eyes. So I saw a quote, and I can't remember what piece it was in. I think it was actually in a Ty Dunn piece, whether it was on Blake Cashman or somebody like that, where the way Flores has coached this defense, he's basically said in some cases we don't worry about somebody leaking out into the flat late because the quarterback is never going to get to that because we're blitzing him so much, or we're creating such a funky coverage look that he's not going to be able to progress to that point. And I really think that's what they're doing with his man coverage out of the backfield, because you'll see a safety come down late, but it's it's really not great coverage given the scenario, right? And if the offense were to be able to dump the ball off to the running back in the flat or something like that, they might get a decently large gain and probably get a conversion. But just the way the offense processes things, the check release, like the pocket's basically collapsed by that time. So it's really hard for the offense to get to that. So I just think that structure is very interesting from the Vikings, right? Having a safety come from far depth, like a half field kind of play down to try to get a running back. I think they've been very successful at being sticky in man coverage. There are misses. Like I would say Shaq Griffin, I think, is the guy who struggles the most in man. Byron Murphy has had a couple of mishaps, but really it's Shaq Griffin who I would be targeting if I were an opposing offense in man coverage. But in this game, I thought they played it really, really well and generally were sticky in coverage. Like there was one miss to me from Geno where he kind of had eliminated a vertical route late in the game that Shaq Griffin kind of lost on, and he might have had a touchdown out of it, but he didn't actually get there. So it worked out okay for the Vikings. And that's, part of the reason you put so much pressure on the opposing offense as the Vikings defense, because they're not able to get those. If I had to sum up like some of the issues the Vikings had in this game, right? Because the Seahawks were able to move the ball. I mean, Geno passed for over 300 yards through the air, and it was like, relatively efficient, like 7-8 yards per attempt. Something like that is, the biggest thing. And this is, again, part of the Vikings defensive design, right? So if they're blitzing 6 players, they only have 5 players in coverage. That makes it really, really difficult to defend the flats. But they had difficulty getting players to the ground once they got the ball in their hand. And there were like a couple really frustrating plays too, where it's like Noah Fant gets the ball in the flat and they rally up to him to try to tackle him. And then he like steps for 5 yards along the sideline, right, to get extra yardage. Or you had like a slant from Jackson Smith and Jigga for like 7 or 8 yards, go for 19 because they weren't able to corral him over the middle of the field, right? So that, I think, like the after catch stuff is one of the concerns, is if you have a team that has guys who are good at staying on their feet and kind of grinding out those extra yards, kind of like Justin Jefferson is on the Vikings, right? Where he's just able to find extra yardage that you don't really think is there once he has the ball in his hands a little bit. That's the biggest concern for me with this defense. And that's what allows teams to move the ball effectively in the 2-minute drill situations, I think is probably the key, because in those situations, you're looking to get, in a lot of cases, it kind of depends on the feel of the play, right? But you're looking to get quick completions that are able to get out of bounds or are able to get yardage after the catch, right? And it kind of depends on if it's like, okay, I have a minute left and I need to go 60 yards, or I have like 2.5 or 3 minutes left and I need to go the length of the field, right? You can live with, the short completions that gain 10 yards at a chunk if you have 2.5, 3 minutes left. If you have a minute left to go to the length of the field, you can't really live like that, and you have to push the ball further downfield, and you end up throwing an interception on the first play of the drive on the last play. Now, the Seahawks did move the ball down the field at the end of the second half, at the end of the second quarter, and got a touchdown at the end of the game. And I guess I can go over a couple of those plays as well, because, one of the biggest plays on that drive was a throw up the seam to Jackson Smith-Njigba. Byron Murphy was in coverage, and the Vikings were playing 2-man. I guess it was a third down. They really moved to man coverage on third downs, I think, pretty frequently. But I don't remember offhand what the down was. And it mirrored a play that the Seahawks had run earlier. So you basically have three verticals from the offense, and Smith-Njigba is running up the seam. Like the very first play of the game, or the very first drive of the game at least, the Seahawks tried this, and it was against the Vikings Tampa 2. So you had their classic invert in Tampa 2. Cam Bynum starts as a single high safety. You have two players drop back. Usually it's a safety and then another corner as kind of the deep players. And then Cam Bynum's the high hole player, right, in Tampa 2. I've talked about that a bunch of times, kind of how that role works. But because, to me, Cam Bynum starts from depth, right, he doesn't have to speed himself up. He can kind of catch Smith-Njigba and then work with him down the field. That allows him to, as he's running with Smith-Njigba, turn to the ball and knock the ball down and get a really, really nice pass breakup on that play. Byron Murphy, who started in man coverage, has to turn and run with Smith-Njigba. He gets a step behind, and he's playing kind of a trail technique. So when you're playing a trail technique, what you really need to do is get your hand up in the receiver's face to try to disrupt the throw. Bynum earlier was able to turn around, find the ball, and then swat it away, right? In this case, Murphy has to try to get his hand up as he's trying to turn his head around to not get like a pass interference or something. He has his arm up, but he can't hit the ball with it. And Smith-Njigba makes a nice catch on a really well-placed throw by Geno, right? Like, that's like absolutely kudos to the quarterback for finding and making that back shoulder throw. It's reminiscent of, if we go all the way back to like week 2 or whatever it was against the 49ers, the critical third down that Sam Darnold converted to Jalen Nailor, where he puts the ball in a perfect place away from a couple defenders. This wasn't like completely unguardable by Murphy like that Darnold throw was, but it's still just a really nice play by the quarterback and receiver to make the play. And a slight difference in coverage makes it easier for the offense to execute the play, right? And that's not saying that's like a bad coverage by the Vikings or anything. I think I just talked about how the man coverage from the Vikings on third downs has worked really well. It's just a difficulty, and I guess ultimately a loss by Byron Murphy, even if I think really the offense deserves more credit for doing a good job than Murphy does for kind of losing out there. And then you have, what was it? It was the JSN touchdown at the end of that half, where you have more man coverage again from the Vikings, right? And I just thought it was a really well-designed play by the Seahawks, because what you end up having is a situation where I think it was it Lockett who was coming across the formation? So the Seahawks started with a 2x2 set, right? And they had Byron Murphy in the slot to the left of the offense, and he runs across with the motion. I'm assuming it was Lockett. I don't think it was DK. And then what happens is, because the Vikings are in man coverage and Murphy's their slot corner, when they flip the formation because of the motion, who's covering who flips. So you want to keep Stephon Gilmore on the furthest outside player. Well, that motion guy, again, I'm pretty confident it was Lockett, because it definitely wasn't Smith-Njigba, goes to the furthest outside. So Gilmore has to cover him. It becomes a bunch formation, the point man in the bunch. You want Shaq Griffin covering. So he goes in man coverage on the point man. And then the furthest inside player, which is JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba, is covered by Byron Murphy, who just had to run across the formation following the motion, right? So he's already struggling to get set a little bit. And then you have a pick route or a rub route, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the Vikings run this a ton on offense, right? It's a great concept. It works really well, especially against man coverage. But they have Lockett take an inside release and then run a wheel route with Smith and Jigba behind it, right? So Murphy has to try to get over the top of Lockett. He clips. I kind of think Lockett blocked a little bit. It probably was OPI to me. But again, the Vikings run this a ton. They get away with it too. Like, it's just the NFL meta is getting away with OPI here. So it's not really, the end of the world. So Murphy clips Gilmore. He's a step behind JSN. It's a wide open touchdown, right? So I thought that was good offensive design. I didn't think the defensive call was bad or anything. I don't know if the execution was so bad. I mean, you would say, Byron Murphy, hey, we can't run into those guys there. You would also say it's probably not technically an illegal play, right? So it's kind of one of those where, the other guys get paid too, to me, on that touchdown. And it really sucks that came in a 2-minute drill where the Seahawks had less than 2 minutes and no time, or maybe they had all their timeouts. But it sucks that it came in that situation where the Vikings have consistently given up problems, but I don't think it's a unique to the 2-minute drill situation kind of thing in that case. I do think the allowing yardage after the catch when you're playing a softer coverage or when you're blitzing a bunch is kind of endemic to the Vikings, and offenses are more likely to attempt those sort of things in the 2-minute situations, which is why I think offenses are a little bit more successful in 2-minute against the Vikings ultimately. So that was a lot to say, first of all, I broke down a touchdown, but also kind of coming back to the original point of, I do think that the tackling or the rallying because of the Vikings blitz looks, and again, this is like a trade-off that the Vikings are making by consistently blitzing 6 guys on first and second down, right? Is that there is going to be more space and it's going to take a little bit longer to rally and tackle. But I do think there have been some tackling lapses as well from the defense. Just kind of across the board, like the defensive backs. And this is not like the Vikings defensive backs are bad at tackling, but they're not the best at tackling. They could probably get a little bit better. So, and that's something that could really hurt them against teams that have well-designed offenses, which is pretty much who you run into in the playoffs. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that unfolds moving forward. And we'll get kind of a preview of it right over the next 2 games with some really well-designed offenses in the Packers and the Lions. And then, it's kind of interesting, right? Because going into this game, I think there was a lot of talk about how bad the Seahawks offensive line was. And, early on, it became clear pretty quickly that Geno was going to play. But early on, it was like, oh man, Sam Howell is going to have a really, really rough time against this defensive line, right? When we weren't sure about Geno's status. And then it turns into, okay, Geno's going to play. He's made the offense look functional, even with the atrocious offensive line. And they've had atrocious protection all year. And I think that's what we saw in this game in terms of the lack of sacks. I don't think there was a lack of pressure. I think the Vikings pass rushers were winning at a really, really high rate in this game. I just think Geno was getting the ball out before they were there. There are multiple times where, and it kind of feels like Sam Darnold a little bit, where there are guys tagging Geno right after he releases the ball. Vikings defenders who've gotten free and gotten to Geno. It's just on an accelerated timeline. And he's getting the ball out so quickly that in some cases it was really successful, right? And he's throwing 50 balls up to the sideline. Sometimes they're great catches. Sometimes we had those throws over the middle of the field. It literally went 50-50, right? One where Bynum was able to make the play. One where Murphy wasn't able to make the play. The fade ball to DK Metcalf, I consider 50-50 ball. I mean, I think that was a really good play by Metcalf. I'll get to that in a little bit. But, it's balls that are going out that don't necessarily have an opportunity. They're 50-50, right? The Vikings defender, if they're in a good position, is going to make a play on it. If they're not in a good position, it's going to be a catch. So that's a trait to me that I like in a quarterback. I think Geno toes the line, and I'll get to this even later in the episode. I think Geno toes the line of being a little bit too aggressive sometimes, and it ends up causing negative plays, right? Obviously he threw 2 interceptions in this game. You had a drop pick by Shaq Griffin where it was, again, a 50-50 ball that Geno really shouldn't have thrown, but he's trying to get away from pressure. And then you had the Blake Cashman drop as well, which I think was actually tipped by Levi Drake Rodriguez, who made a couple excellent plays in this game. But, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you're getting the ball out so quickly because you're afraid of taking sacks that it leads to negative plays anyway. So I was really impressed with the way the Vikings were able to pressure in this game. And I think Geno, credit to him because a lot of the positive plays came from his ability to get the ball out quickly. But I think there was a lot of negative that came with that as well. And that's why the Vikings were ultimately able to get 2 picks on him and win the game. So if we go into those 2 interceptions, the first one was absolutely a stunning play to me by Dallas Turner. And I haven't talked a lot about Dallas Turner on this show, just because he hadn't contributed much. And, the last couple of weeks are probably his most impactful games of the season, like the last 3 weeks or so. And obviously I didn't do the podcast the last couple of weeks, so didn't get an opportunity to talk about like a sack against the Bears or things like that there. But I'd really highly recommend, you probably listen to it if you listen to this show, but going over to Luke Braun's podcast and his Patreon specifically, where he has a ton of videos on Dallas Turner. I think he also writes for Arif Hassan's Wide Left Substack. I think he had a big, I know he writes for them, and I know he had a big article about Dallas Turner out there. But this interception was really, really impressive stuff from Dallas Turner, right? Because you drafted this guy to be a first-round edge rusher, and that's not necessarily what he's been in the Vikings defense. I mean, don't get me wrong, he has been an edge rusher, but he has very much been trained for the Andrew Van Ginkel role, right? To have the flexibility to drop into coverage and be a very proficient coverage dropper in a way that, like a Jonathan Grenard, who the Vikings also ask to drop into coverage a lot. Like, we're not asking everybody else on the defense to drop into coverage. Actually, there was a completion against Harrison Phillips in this game that was like, man, I get it. I understand that the way we blitz requires sometimes defensive tackles like Harrison Phillips to drop into coverage, but it sure did not work in that case. But anyway, back to Dallas Turner, right? Yeah, on this play where he has the interception, I think it was a cover 3 rep, and he's just playing off-ball linebacker. Like, he's not lined up on the line of scrimmage. He is just off the ball, doing a normal zone drop like you'd expect Blake Cashman or Ivan Pace to do. And he does the zone drop right next to Blake Cashman, and it looks nearly identical. And Blake Cashman's a really, really good coverage linebacker. So he does the zone drop. He identifies who's entered his zone in Noah Fant, gets on him, kind of sticks to him in coverage, and then has his eyes on the quarterback and sees the throw and drives on the throw better than Noah Fant does, right? Like, the tight end has a chance to go for this ball too as Geno throws it and makes it kind of a diving, really nice catch on the interception. So fantastic play by Dallas Turner. Not exactly, I guess, what I would have projected for him, after the Vikings drafted him. I thought maybe there'd be a lot more true edge rushing from him, and that's where we see the success. But we love to see the development as the off the ball stuff, because I think he's basically getting thrown into the fire, right, and trying to learn everything with this role. And as he progresses along, I think you're going to see the pass rush talent, as it did against the Bears, pop up more as he has to think less, because, again, I think he's being thrown absolutely everything there is in this defense, and he's picked up the coverage portion of it like really, really well, especially for what his profile was coming out. Like, he had very limited coverage experience in Alabama, and I watched a lot of his Alabama tape. And it's all dropping off of the line of scrimmage, right? It's not being a stack linebacker and zone dropping. So because that's coming along so well, I think the pass rush stuff will follow, because it's what he was already good at, but he probably hasn't had the chance to progress it to kind of the NFL level, because there's a big jump in terms of what opposing tackles are able to do between the NFL and college, even in the SEC and college, right? And even going against some guys who are going to be first round picks. There's just such a massive difference in terms of the quality and strategy of play, in terms of the way tackles attack you, that I think that progression will come as he stops learning everything, stops thinking everything, and starts being able to play with instinct and athleticism. Because that sack last week against the Bears was like an incredibly athletic play. To be able to go to the ground and like leap, like jump like he's like a large predatory cat, right, on Caleb Williams was insane. And then the second interception was a Theo Jackson pick to seal the game, right? The first play of the very last drive of the game for the Seahawks. And Obviously, a lot has been made of the Geno DK miscommunication on that play, right? So DK Metcalf looks like he's trying to run a post or a corner route, sorry, not a post, towards the outside. And he just kind of gives up on the route, right? Because he sees a deep safety over top. And the Vikings are running Tampa 2 on this play, right? Pretty typical of them. Geno wanted him to run a harder out route, and I think that is correct against the coverage, right? You have a safety over top, so you can't run a post into him. You have to try to get underneath him and make a catch through a hit. Based on Theo Jackson's position and his ability to jump this ball, I don't really see how this is completed to DK, even if he is able to run the out route. And really, Geno has a pass rusher bearing down on him. He's just trying to throw the ball up because the Seahawks have no timeouts. There's like a minute left in the game. He really, really can't take a sack. So he's just trying to get the ball out there. If DK is able to cut off his route, run an out route, and get in front of Theo Jackson, maybe it was a catch. I think more likely it was a big hit to the back if Jackson wasn't able to completely jump the route anyway, because DK was in a really rough position in terms of in his vertical stem. He needs to turn really tightly to get to the outside, and that's the one thing that DK Metcalf isn't really good at, right? He's really not fluid and able to have kind of a flat break on that out route. So obviously, really bad look for the Seahawks offense, right? Really bad look for DK Metcalf not being on the same page as Geno, and I think Geno was right in that case. But at the end of the day, like, I think this is a pass breakup or an interception regardless. So I think it was just a really nice instinctual play by Theo Jackson being able to read what was going on, and a great rush by whoever was in Geno's face on that play. Just pulled it up to confirm. It was Jihad Ward who was in Geno's face on the play. He like roasted the center with the spin move, right, and was right there. So I really think that's not a successful play regardless of how the Seahawks played it on offense. I mentioned earlier we had 2 dropped interceptions. There's not like a ton to go over with them. The Cashman pick was a really nice play by him to me of, just roboting back, right? He bites against play action, gets depth, and Geno throws the ball like basically right to him. Levi Drake Rodriguez tipped the ball on that play. So, that was but a good play to see from the rookie who really has gotten no playing time this year. Obviously, with Jalen Redmond out, he kind of got called into action, and I thought played pretty well. I think I saw he only played 6 snaps when I was looking at the box score, but he made notable contributions on 2 of them, right? He had that play, and then he had a goal line run stop where he just completely blew up the play. So impressive stuff, 2 really notable positive plays in 6 snaps for the Vikings 7th round rookie. And I, to be honest, I haven't really gotten to cover Jalen Redmond's like very excellent stretch of games as well. I thought he's been fantastic in the last 3 games before going out against the Bears with a concussion on like the last play of the game. But just the consistent penetration he's got in the run game has been massive. It hasn't exactly translated to a pass rush yet. I'm hoping that it kind of will, because the Vikings obviously lack the interior pass rush that they literally have to put 4 edge rushers on the field to get, right? But it's not a situation where the flashing from Levi Drake Rodriguez would make me want him to overtake Jalen Redmond because of how well Jalen Redmond has been playing. But it's just a really positive sign that the Vikings had 3 guys who I didn't have a lot of trust in. I mean, like, Drake Rodriguez was Rodriguez, Levi Drake is like the first name, was an exciting, potential option, but obviously a raw player coming out of a small school, you don't know what to expect, right? And then a completely undrafted free agent in Taki Taimani, who's been on IR for a long time, but played really well in limited snaps that he got early in the season. And a guy who's in the XFL in Jalen Redmond, like, having those guys who I really projected none of them to make the roster entering camp. Maybe I projected Levi Drake Rodriguez to make it just because of his like status as an intriguing prospect. But to have the 3 of those guys come out of nowhere and be like positive contributors is a really, really nice find by the front office. Yeah, the Shaq Griffin near interception, if I go over real quick, he just played on top of, I think it was DK Metcalf on the play. Geno overthrew the ball a little bit. He really shouldn't have thrown the ball at all. And Griffin wasn't able to come down with it. I mean, it was a tough catch, right? He had to jump up into the air and survive the ground with the ball, but you really hope you come down with it. That's why they don't play. That's why they don't play receiver, right? They can't catch. No. Flip it over. Last couple notes on the offense. I wanted to go over the Seahawks touchdowns, right? Because I think those are the biggest negative plays from obviously a touchdown is the biggest negative play for the defense, Matt. Like, come on. But so the first one, DK Metcalf touchdown against Stephon Gilmore. I think this was quarters coverage, which turns into one-on-one, basically man, when the outside receiver runs an outside route, right? It's fully Stephon Gilmore's responsibility to cover DK one-on-one. He is playing with inside leverage, right, because he wants to protect against the post, and then you're trying to squeeze to the sideline, right? Try to squeeze the receiver out of bounds by playing inside of him. Doesn't do a great job of squeezing DK. It's a little bit difficult. I mean, it's a really difficult task to do as a corner. He doesn't do a terrible job. Like, DK did have constricted space down the sideline. I just thought it was really well played by DK. So if you watch the play, you see that Gilmore is roughly in phase with Metcalf, but Metcalf takes a couple slower steps as he approaches turning around the ball. So that slows down Gilmore as well. And then he's able to extend vertical and like kind of speed back up a step or two to create late separation. And that's creating late separation is kind of the key word that we should take away here. It's just a really, really impressive ability to do that from that player, and it's really good ball tracking. There was actually a play on the Vikings side of the game, and I'll get to it, where Addison missed a touchdown where he tried to create late separation, and Darnold kind of underthrew the ball a little bit in that case. Geno here doesn't underthrow the ball. You know, Gilmore's out of position and looks kind of silly from him. But I think it was really, again, more of a good play from DK in terms of how he's selling Gilmore on things. And Gilmore's a really, really savvy player, right? Like, I don't think Stephon Gilmore doesn't understand how to play the ball in the air. I just think DK Metcalf's a physical freak, and he played the ball really smartly and really in a veteran way that enabled him to score a touchdown on Gilmore, right? And Gilmore doesn't have the high-end athleticism that he once does. Right, so having him one-on-one against an absolute freak athlete in DK Metcalf is going to be a little bit of a disadvantage for you as a defense. But it just a really nice ball, really nice play by DK. I kind of already went over the Jackson Smith-Njigba touchdown, so refer back to a little bit earlier. And then, you know, there was the A.J. Barner touchdown late in the game. And to me, that one's on Shaq Griffin, right? So he got one touchdown on all three of the corners. And the Seahawks do a good job, again, motioning to bunch. The Vikings want to box off the bunch, right? So playing box versus bunch is the reason it's called box is because you're trying to draw a box kind of around the offense, right? So you have, you know, and to go back to what a bunch is, right? It's three receivers. In this case, it was a tight end, so it's probably like tray or trio or something. I forget what the technical word for that is. But you have one as the point and two flanking on either side. One was a tight end inside, I think. Was it Barner who was the farthest, who was the point man? And then you had a wide receiver to the outside. So the way you play this coverage is you have one player covering the first outside route. You have one player covering the first inside route. You have another player responsible for the second outside route, shallow, and then the deep player responsible for the first vertical route. If there are two vertical routes, the outside corner, the one who's responsible for the first out, or the inside player takes the second vertical route. The point man kind of doesn't really take that second vertical route. He's passing the first vertical route off. So it's, you know, you have one man totally shallow, one guy to the left, one guy to the right, and one guy deep, right? And the Seahawks do a really good job of sending the inside tight end inside. The point man goes vertical, but it's delayed, and it's a switch release with the outside receivers running a crossing route. So you have the safety deep. I think it was Theo Jackson. It doesn't really matter if it was Jackson or Bynum, but he takes that first route, and then there's kind of a delayed second vertical route that Shaq Griffin, who's playing deeper coverage than the point man on it, needs to get to. And he doesn't realize it. He's late. You can see him kind of panic a little bit, try to get back to the ball, but Barner's wide open. It's a 4-yard touchdown. So to me, that one was on Shaq Griffin. It's a really good route concept to attack the type of defense that the Vikings put out there for that, but you still got to make the play as a defense, right? And it's 3rd and 4. You just got to have that stop on 3rd down and kind of force a field goal or force a really difficult decision to go from it from the 4-yard line, right? But they weren't able to do that. It ends up giving the Seahawks the lead in the game, right? Game could have been tied with a field goal or something like that, and that's probably the decision the Seahawks would have made. You don't have to come back to win, right? You just need to go down the field and kind of earn the win there. Tough play by the defense, good design by the offense, right? There's kind of two sides to it. So if we flip it over to the offensive side of the ball, because that's pretty much all I have on the defense. Again, I didn't do a ton on the run game. The Seahawks didn't run the ball a lot, so it's kind of hard to do a lot on the run game when there's not really all that much interesting happening. If we flip it over to the offensive side of the ball, I think the Vikings, similar to the way the Seahawks attacked the Vikings defense in a couple places, really did a good job of understanding what the Seahawks want to do on defense, to me, which is play match style coverage, right? So the way the Vikings play coverage, especially their zone coverages, especially their blitz zone coverages, I would say are more akin to spot drop coverages than what the Seahawks are doing. So when you're playing zone, there's two ways to do it, right? There are country, we'll call it, like Nick Saban calls it, country cover 3 versus match cover 3, right? Where country cover 3, you have assigned landmarks for the defenders to get to, and they read the quarterback's eyes once they're there. That leads to a lot of holes in the defense. Offenses are really good at attacking that style of coverage. Match cover 3, you have receivers play the route combinations you have defenders play the route combinations from the receivers. So rather than having their eyes on the quarterback, they have their eyes on the receivers. And when a guy crosses another guy, you have a certain set of rules to know when you're going to take guys. When I talk about mod or mag coverage or something like that, or when I talk about a quarters player having, like Gilmore earlier, having the receiver outside and deep, right? As soon as he runs a vertical, right, you're in one-on-one coverage because that's kind of a match style coverage. And I'm not saying the Vikings don't run that, but what the Vikings often do, especially in their blitzes, is run to get to the stop, right? There's a ton of disguise. You see defenders on the back end moving very significantly at the snap. So they're trying to get to their spots and then their relative areas and then find defenders once they get there. A lot of times they have their eyes on the quarterbacks. In match coverage, you're trying to read where the receivers are going and kind of follow them and mirror them. And then you get once you have a pretty good idea of where they're going to be position-wise, you try to get your eyes on the quarterback. So I thought the Vikings did a really, really good job with attacking the way defenses match coverage. And what I mean by that is, and it became evident on the Vikings' first drive, the touchdown drive with the throw to Jordan Addison. So the Vikings had like a 3rd and 3, and then they scored the touchdown to Addison immediately afterwards. And on the 3rd and 3, they're running out a bunch, and what they basically have is the Seahawks are once again trying to box the bunch from the Vikings, right? So they have the inside player, they have the outside player, they have the vertical player, they have the short player. The Vikings run the two inside receivers on the bunch, right? So the point man, and I think it was all 3 receivers in this case. So it was Naylor, Addison, and Jefferson. They run those guys outside or vertical, right? So they're running both like probably corners. And then Justin Jefferson comes across the field and he runs actually past the box defender, he runs directly at the box defender on the inside, right? So that guy knows he has Justin Jefferson who's running across inside. And this is why it's a match coverage, right? Because you read the route distribution and you have certain rules based on what the offensive does. So he widens towards the middle of the field, right? Justin Jefferson's coming from the farthest outside of the bunch, running across the field. Jefferson just sits down before he gets to him, and Darnold delivers the throw accurately on time. So you have the outside player who, you have the underneath player who's working through the route combination that's going past him in terms of Addison and Naylor, and he's not able to follow Jefferson across the formation. You have the guy Jefferson's running into doesn't want to get run by, right? So he needs to get a head start going in the other direction to try to follow Jefferson across the field in case it's a crossing route. Jefferson just sits down and he's wide open for a 5-yard gain, right? So it's a really nice answer against that type of coverage to try to get players hedging against a direction that they can't get beat in and then stopping, right, and subverting those expectations. And Addison does basically the exact same thing on the next play for the touchdown. So it's like 1st and goal from the 5, right, for the Vikings on the Addison touchdown. And they have like 12 personnel in, right? So, or 21 personnel in, right? So CJ Ham is a fullback. He's kind of blind as a wing tight end, and they send him in motion across the formation. So you had Ham and Jefferson on one side, you had the back in the backfield, and you had Oliver and Addison on the other side. And the Vikings run a route combination that pulls the linebacker in the middle of the field towards the right side of the field, going towards Addison, but Addison's running in the other direction, right? Runs right by him, sits down over the middle of the field and gets the touchdown. You have Oliver vertical, he occupies the safety, but what really the key is you run both backs actually on routes to the left, right? So you have multiple eyes on the running backs because you need to have guys who have them in coverage. You have 4 guys run over there. The middle linebacker is primarily responsible kind of for the running back in coverage or the underneath zones. When you have 4 potential routes to your right, you need to widen to your right because they're trying to flood the underneath zones. If you only have 4 overall underneath zones in the defense, you need at least 3 of them to be on the right side of the field, right? Or you're not going to be able to rally and tackle or make a play on the ball. So just the way the Vikings ran the motion at the snap with CJ Ham and then also ran Addison back across the field, you can see it pull a linebacker on the string, even though Darnold opens up to the other direction. He opens up to Justin Jefferson on the slant, right? The linebacker's not watching Sam Darnold's eyes. He's watching the running back out of the backfield and the fullback coming across the backfield because he's reading those route combinations in his match coverage. So it was just a really smart design to understand from an offensive perspective what the Seahawks are trying to do on defense and then attack that with route combinations that get defenders running in the wrong direction, right? And they have to try to are forced to catch up, and you end up with a wide open curl to Jordan Addison in the middle of the field. You're like, how did that happen? That's insane. Well, you have a slant, so the inside player on the right-hand side needs to help with Justin Jefferson on a slant, right? You're not going to ignore Justin Jefferson. And then the inside player in the middle of the field isn't there because he had to run in the other direction because his eyes took him there. So I just thought really smart route design from the Vikings, and the intention was seen on the final play of the game too. The touchdown to Justin Jefferson at the end of the game, and Alec Lewis at The Athletic wrote a really good article. I retweeted it and reskeeted it on Blue Sky. So please go check that out because it kind of talks about Kevin O'Connell's offensive process, and that's something I've been really excited about this year, just in terms of how he is so obviously able to understand what defenses are doing and manipulate them. And I think that really shows in like how he does his third down package, right? But like also just across the board in terms of who he is as a really, really smart play designer and has a good understanding when to call plays. But so he did a piece and used the Jefferson touchdown, the game-winning touchdown, as a great example. And it goes over exactly what happens on the play. So if you remember back in, and we do this on our current defense as well, but if you remember a poach safety or a trick safety in quarters coverage for the Vikings with Ed Donatel, right, a couple years ago, where you have a presentation on offense where you have 3 receivers to one side and a single receiver to the backside. If the 3 receivers to the one side all run vertical, in quarters you don't have enough deep defenders to defend those receivers to that side of the field, unless the safety to this far side of the field cheats over there and has his eyes over there to try to help take away that third vertical receiver. So the Vikings, knowing that the Seahawks love running quarters coverage, I mean, that's kind of the basis of Mike McDonald's defense. They know that they have this poach safety in the defense. They run a route combination and a route from Justin Jefferson that attacks that. So on the play, and it may not exactly have been quarters, but some variation of like cover 2 or 2 read, or like a half quarter coverage, like quarter half coverage, right? But you can see, and again, Alec does this in his piece as well, and I'll probably tweet about this play, but the safety has his eyes on the other side of the field at the snap. He's looking at the 3 receiver side because he's responsible for anything that comes that direction. And then the Vikings, with Justin Jefferson, singled up one-on-one against the corner on the backside, have him run an inside release route and a fake to the post. So that gets the corner to that side to think about what might happen. And you can see that corner's eyes go across the field to try to see if anything's coming across the field at him. So a common combo would be something like Yankee, where you have a receiver run a post route, in this case Justin Jefferson run a post route, and the number 3 to the other side, or maybe the number 2 to the other side, run a deep crosser. So in that kind of route combination, and the Vikings love this concept. It's an awesome concept. I've probably posted a ton of plays where they get big gains out of it because you put the safety into conflict. In this case, the corner might be thinking, okay, Jefferson's running a post. This looks like a post from him. I'm going to pass him off to my deep safety. And you can see the deep safety's eyes flip from when he realized nobody's going vertical at the snap to the receiver. Well, the corner doesn't really know what's happening across the field. So he sees the inside release from Jefferson, thinks it's potentially a post, looks across the field, sees nobody's coming across the field at him, and he looks back to the quarterback and tries to get depth, right? But he's already screwed at that point because he tried to pass Jefferson off to the deep safety. The deep safety opens to the left, or opens to his left, right? The right side of the offense isn't looking at Jefferson at all. When he turns around, he sees Jefferson coming right at him on an inside release, and now Jefferson has a 2-way go, right? So he can either run to the post where the safety needs to protect, or try to run to the outside to the corner, and Jefferson fades to the outside. So the time the deep safety wasted in terms of looking over to the left, just getting depth in his drop, staying in the middle of the field, gave Jefferson all the advantage he needed to fade to the outside. Darnold makes a great throw. He had to step around pressure in the pocket. Huge credit to Sam Darnold in terms of the ability to step around pressure in this game, by the way. But, he steps around the defender, makes a throw. Jefferson's past the deep safety. The corner can't fall off fast enough, right, and make the play from behind. It's a game-winning touchdown. Really phenomenal play. But again, it shows that the Vikings had an advanced understanding of what the Seahawks were trying to do on defense, and they were able to consistently attack it on offense throughout the course of this game, and that's how you scored 27 points in a football game, right? And you win on a game-winning drive on an almost 40-yard touchdown where the best receiver in the game seems like he's wide open because the defense couldn't figure out how to effectively pass off the route combination because you designed a route combination to specifically beat the defense that they were playing. So it's just a really, really high-level stuff from Kevin O'Connell there, and I think that was like the big point of the game from the Vikings offense. Sam Darnold, I just mentioned, I thought was really, really good moving in the pocket throughout the whole game. There were a ton of times where he made big climbs into the pocket. He was sidestepping pressure. He was evading stuff. He got hit a bunch. Like the Vikings offensive line, again, I would say didn't have a banner day in pass protection, and he had to move off of his spot a number of times. But he was moving around really effectively and only took 3 sacks, including one where he gave up at the end of the game intentionally because he didn't want to throw an incompletion, right? Everything was covered downfield, and it was a smart sack. And I guess he took another sack that was negated by the face mask penalty, obviously a face mask penalty, but that once again, was a little bit more on the offensive line than it was on Sam Darnold. You had a couple critical scrambles at the end of the game. Like, that movement was really strong. I think where he kind of lagged behind a little bit was in his accuracy in this game. I thought you saw a number of balls go high. And again, I didn't watch the game live. I know it was a little bit rainy, a little bit slick. So it could have been, he didn't have the best grip in the roll on the ball and ended up being a little bit imprecise. It could have been all of the movement he was being required to do made it difficult to throw consistently and have consistent accuracy because he wasn't able to maintain the base that he normally likes to maintain, right? And he throws off platform a lot. It's not like he's a bad off platform thrower, but it's hard to be 100% consistent when you aren't able to throw from a normal platform ever. So like, there were a couple high passes, right? The fourth down that TJ Hockenson made an incredible catch on the sideline was very easily could have been a turnover on downs, right, on the first drive, and probably changes the course of the game. There's a drop, I guess you'll say. Actually, yeah. So the first TJ Hockenson third down that he kind of dropped, I thought was good ball placement by Darnold and just a difficult catch that Hockenson wasn't able to reel in terms of a contested one. The second one, where Hockenson got hit by two players at the same time and dropped it, I put that one a little bit more on Darnold because the ball to me was behind Hockenson in a way that didn't shield him from a defender, right? The first one was trying to shield him from a defender. The second one really wasn't. So to me, that one was a little bit on Darnold in terms of ball placement for him dropping that. There were a couple catches by Justin Jefferson that he had to make, going up high or, just not where he wasn't able to maximize his yardage after the catch because Darnold missed the throw a little bit. There was a drop by Josh Oliver, I think I'm remembering, where I thought the ball was a little bit far inside. And there was the one I mentioned earlier where it was like, I thought Addison got good late separation and could have had a touchdown on the play, but Darnold missed the throw short. It ended up, Addison tried to make a leaping catch back into the defender, and it became an incompletion. By the way, I don't think that was like PI or anything on that play. Again, didn't see it live, but it seemed to me like a pretty solid play by the defender, although who knows, right? I didn't really watch. I didn't go back and watch like any close-up angles of it or anything. So yeah, Darnold, again, strong pocket movement day, spotty accuracy, but I really like the movement and the decision-making and the processing from him. Like, I think he's playing at a really, really, really high level of quarterbacking that if you had told me he was going to do this at the beginning of the season, right, I knew Sam Darnold had the arm to be able to make the throws, right? Like, everybody knew that Sam Darnold had the physical talent to be able to make the throws. I think the efficiency with which he's moving the pocket is shocking to me, right? I would have told you he was bad at handling pressure and navigating the pocket before this. I think the consistency of the decision-making, getting the ball to the right player and not putting the ball in harm's way is really impressive. And I think that the physical accuracy, right, the arm talent that we knew he had is probably, and that this isn't fair to him, right? Because it was one game where I think he's been a little bit imprecise. He hasn't been perfect the whole time, but I think that would say like, oh, the physical talent or like the arm ability is the thing I believe in Sam Darnold before the season. And it's kind of funny that it was like the only thing holding him back from having an absolutely incredible game in this game, right? Where all the other stuff was so good. So I really think that's shown Sam Darnold's progression as a player. And I kind of think like it's a legitimate thing in terms of his ability moving forward. Now, I'm not going to get into the should the Vikings like extend Sam Darnold debate or whatever here right now, at least, right? I think that's, first of all, an off-season topic, right? But second of all, it still very much depends on how the rest of the season goes, guys. Like, there's a chance, and I'll get into this with the Packers, but the Vikings could be the 1 seed. They could also be the 6 seed if they lose both games. They could end up below the Packers, right? So while I really like what Sam Darnold's done, I don't know if I would, again, want to pay him, $40 million a year to play quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward. I don't know if I'd want to move on from J.J. McCarthy, and that full discussion is for something kind of after the season. Like on the Seahawks side of the ball, I didn't get a ton from the run game here. I mean, there were a couple of really nice reps where the Vikings offensive line got great push on the Seahawks defensive line, an early zone rep in the game. Like Aaron Jones got 9 yards or something there. Aaron Jones had a respectable day, 60 something yards on like 16 or 18 carries or something like that. Certainly not a banner day, right? Like 4 yards per attempt or so, roughly, right? You can round it to that, either up or down. Is not great, but again, I'm been a fan of Aaron Jones this entire year. I don't think there's anything. I think it was kind of just a little bit of variance and a little bit of poor blocking. Like, he gets you absolutely what your offensive line blocks and more. So certainly no complaints about him in this game. Just not a lot to talk about in the run game that I found particularly interesting. And then the offensive line, I think, continues to struggle. I think we've seen, big struggles from Blake Brandel in recent weeks. This week, it wasn't so much him. I thought Cam Robinson lost a couple times, and I thought he's been one of the better players on the offensive line and has done a really, really good job stepping in as the starting left tackle. But I thought he struggled a bit in this game, was responsible for a few of the pressures that happened. The first sack, I think, was on Bradbury, but Risner also lost in a collapsing pocket. That big sack face mask was on like the entire left side of the offensive line. All of Bradbury, Brandel, and Robinson kind of got crushed back into the pocket. The final sack, again, I don't really put on anybody, but there was a lot of pressure coming at Sam Darnold that he had to navigate through and avoid. I don't think really any of it came from Brian O'Neill, but the other four guys really, I think, need to step up in pass protection as we get later and later in the season. So, and again, I don't have like specific, okay, I at this point, I'm not going to break down specific things that they struggled with, but it's just kind of a whole unit thing, right, where they need to be on better coordination. I don't think there were any misses on stunts in this game that I can recall, which has been absolutely... Oh, you know what? There was a pretty nice stunt by the Seahawks that got Aaron Jones in pass protection on Jaron Reed that led to a... was it a sack? I think Reed did get a sack on that play, or it was a big hit on Darnold at the very least, because, it was just the way the Vikings blocked it up. Aaron Jones ended up blocking a defensive tackle on a stunt, and that's never going to be good for your running back. I don't care who it is. But in general, the offensive line communication, particularly with the left side of the offensive line, needs to be cleaned up. I don't think it was as big of an issue this week, but it's been issues in previous weeks. So we'll see how that works moving forward, right? And we're going to have a big test against the Green Bay Packers, who I think like to blitz off-ball guys a lot and like to stunt a lot on their defensive front. So hopefully the Vikings are up for that task, right? But we'll see how it is moving forward. So if we get into the Packers here, I think this is a really interesting matchup, and it'll tell us a lot about both teams. Historically, I have really bad memories of Vikings-Packers game around this time frame. I think all of us do. I wrote an article for Zone Coverage this week, kind of just previewing the matchup overall, but I went over at the beginning of that the history of the Vikings-Packers matchup, like at or near Christmas or New Year's or whatever, kind of the holiday season, right? And it's ugly. So there was a bad loss in 2019 where Kirk threw 3 picks. That was kind of like, okay, the season's going to the end. And then eventually they did make the playoffs as a wild card, but they still had an opportunity to win the division at that point over the Packers if they'd gotten that win, and it was a complete dud. Dalvin Cook was out for the game, so that didn't help either, but Sam Darnold did not do good. They lost 23-10. And then obviously the last 3 years, so 2011, the Vikings were going up against, they were trying to make the wild card, right? And the division overall really wasn't all that good. I'm sorry, in 2021. But the Vikings obviously struggled. They had a bunch of defensive injuries. It was Mike Zimmer's last year. There was a lot of toxicity around the building, but they were mounting a little bit of a comeback in terms of wins as it went over the last couple games of the season. And they had a really good opportunity to beat the Packers and try to make a make a run for the playoffs and finish at 9-8. Instead, they end up finishing. I guess they finished 8-9 that season because they beat the Bears in a meaningless Week 17 game. But it was a rough game there. They lost big once again. 2022, obviously the fraud Minnesota Vikings. We were kind of riding high over a series of close victories. We have Packers fans calling us frauds the whole time. It's really frustrating. The Packers aren't very good. As Aaron Rodgers' last season with them. The Packers aren't going to make the playoffs, but they didn't. The Packers in Week 18 needed the Lions to win, and they beat. I forget who they beat, but that Lions win is what knocked the Packers out of the playoffs, right? A meaningless Lions win knocks the Packers out of the playoffs. The Packers had a chance and were kind of mounting a comeback in terms of victories to make the playoffs. The Vikings had the ability to shut the door on them by beating them. I'm sorry. Going back to the 2021 game, that's the Kirk Cousins COVID game, right? So Kirk Cousins is out of the game with COVID, and just it's an absolute nightmare, right? From Sean Mannion, the Packers absolutely kill the Vikings. 2022, Kirk is back. But, the Vikings are frauds, right? And it's like they went 13-4, but had a negative point differential because they won every game by one score, and they lost by like 40 points every game. And it's another game where the Vikings are completely hapless on offense. They go into Lambeau. They get absolutely crushed by the Packers. It's devastating because, again, the Packers we just need to beat the Packers to eliminate them from playoff contention and, further our chances at maybe the number 1 seed that year. I don't know how close we were to the Eagles, but it was not that far away. Obviously, they were the 2 seed. But it just put up an absolute dud on Lambeau. And then last year, once again, the Vikings are trying, it's been a tough season. You had all the quarterback injuries. You had the quarterback shuffling. We went through Josh Dobbs. We went through Nick Mullins. We decided we're going to start Jaren Hall. It's a rookie. The Packers are a good team, but again, they started off slow and they're trying to come back and make the playoffs. The Vikings have the same record. They're in competition for the playoffs with the Packers. If you win here, you have a really good inside shot kind of to get a wild card, and you throw up an absolute dud because Jaren Hall was not prepared to play in an NFL game. And I don't think that's Jaren Hall's fault. I don't even blame Kevin O'Connell for starting Jaren Hall in the game because the Vikings needed to do something different, and the season was kind of falling apart at that point. But it's just a disaster, right? That's the history of the Vikings versus the Packers on this time. I don't think this game is going to be similar. I think you look back, it's backup quarterbacks in 2 of those games. You're missing the engine of your offense in Dalvin Cook. And again, running back shouldn't matter that much, but the Vikings under Mike Zimmer, it really, really mattered. In terms of what they wanted to do in establishing the offense, right? And running off of play action. That was a play action based team, and they didn't like to run play action if they weren't running the ball successful, even though it's proven that you can do that, right? But it just absolutely set the Vikings behind, and they weren't able to come back. And then obviously the embarrassment in 2022, where frankly, that Vikings team just wasn't as good as what their record was, right? And this year, I think it's significantly different because I think the Vikings team is as good as their record is. I think they're a top 5 team in the NFL. I also had an article on Zone Coverage kind of talking about how good the Vikings were relative to the other Super Bowl contenders and how the Vikings are the only one in that list who's a surprise, right? Everybody thought that the Chiefs were going to be Super Bowl contenders. Everybody thought that the Ravens were going to be Super Bowl contenders. The Bills, people had questions about, but obviously they have Josh Allen. Everybody kind of thought that they were going to be good. Everybody thought the Lions were going to be good. Everybody thought the Packers were going to be good. Those are 5 teams. Nobody thought did I say the Ravens? If I didn't say the Ravens, I meant the Ravens as well. Those 5 teams, everybody thought were going to be good. They were all like plus 1,000 or worse to make the playoffs. The Vikings were like 101 to win the Super Bowl prior to the season. All of those teams were projected 10 plus wins from Vegas. I think they were all 10.5 overs, over under. The Vikings were 6.5. This Vikings team is legitimately good if you look at every single metric that there is regarding football. Like EPA per play, DVOA, point differential, just basically every way you can measure the strength of the team. The Vikings are a really good football team, and they're on par with these teams. They have probably the second best defense in the NFL at this point, behind the Denver Broncos. They have a strong offense. It's not the best offense in the NFL, but it is a very good offense. And they're just a well-rounded team who I don't think have a ton of glaring deficiencies that can be exploited by opposing offenses. So I don't think, and they don't have glaring deficiencies on offense that can be exploited by opposing defenses. Like the offensive line pass protection is up and down. But I would say it's a little bit exasperated by the way the Vikings call plays, the way Sam Darnold holds on the ball because of the way the Vikings call plays and he's reading things out. And the Vikings have the weapons on the perimeter to win quickly enough that the offensive line pass protection being a little bit shaky doesn't always matter, right? So you're going to have maybe ups and downs, and you're going to take sacks. We know Sam Darnold is going to take sacks, but you're also going to get yours on offense. You're not going to get completely shut out by the opposing defense, in my opinion. And the Vikings haven't been completely shut out by anybody at all this year. Even the Jags game, which was their lowest scoring output of the season, or the two losses to the Rams and the Lions, they were moving the ball really, really effectively on offense. They just weren't able to get the ball into the end zone in the case of the Jags game, or they just didn't have enough drives, and their defense kind of didn't do enough on the other two games to stop their opponents from winning. So I think you're going to see at least solid offensive output, and this defense, again, has times where they've been gotten, right? We go back to the really good opponents of the Lions and the Rams, and they were able to move the ball consistently on this defense. But this defense is intentionally a little bit boom bust, right? It's a little bit, okay, we're going to cover deep, right? Because the Vikings run a ton of too high, a ton of deeper coverages in terms of quarters, or even a safer cover 3, like against a blitz. And they allow like 20-yard passes and stuff like that, right? I'm not going to say they don't allow what are considered explosives, but they don't really allow 40, 50-yard over the top of the defense passes that kind of shift the game and score immediately. So their kind of MO is to force you to keep throwing the ball underneath, or at least underneath the deepest players on the defense, force you to throw over the middle of the field, try to attack tight windows or try to attack zone coverages, and they'll eventually drive on the ball and get an interception. There's a reason they've gotten a turnover in every single game this year, and it's because they're really good at ball hawking on defense, and they're trying to bait the offense into making mistakes. They put pressure on the quarterback immediately by putting guys with 6 guys at the line of scrimmage, rushing them, dropping them out in the coverage, creating confusion and chaos all over the field, and that's what's leading to turnovers. It's kind of hard to say with turnovers because they're not really a sustainable resource. Like Arif on North's Code kind of had a pretty good discussion about this week, where it's like you can create turnover opportunities on a consistent basis, but whether or not you're actually converting those opportunities is kind of random. So you can lead to droughts game after game. And the Vikings haven't had any droughts this year. Right, so that very well may be coming, but I don't think it's actually going to be too much of an issue for the Vikings because of the way they create chaos and the way they consistently provide themselves those opportunities. Like the Vikings are good at converting turnover opportunities, but they're not elite at converting turnover opportunities. I talked about earlier 2 dropped interceptions, right? So that's the Vikings creating a turnover opportunity and not being able to convert. How many batted passes do you see, or players being close to turnovers, or times where they've almost ripped the ball out, right? They've got a guy stood up and they're tearing at the ball, or their fumble recovery rate, which is under 50%. The Packers, by the way, have the 5th best fumble recovery rate in the NFL. The Vikings are all the way down at like 24th or something like that, right? So they're not really reliant on the fluky plays for turnovers. They're consistently putting themselves in good position and then converting on a number of those, but not like an inordinate number of those. So I really do think that kind of turnover thing, and this is a rant I wasn't expecting to get into, but it is kind of sustainable for the Vikings moving forward. And again, it's going to be a game-by-game basis. If you roll ones, right, on everything, if you roll once every time in a game, like that's possible, right? You can fail every single time. Or like I used like a role-playing game analogy, but like I guess is like a craps analogy, rolling 7s. I don't really know how to gamble. But you can have a run of bad luck, right? And it can kill you over the course of the game. But the Vikings are skilled enough to where I don't think, even if they get all bad luck for an entire game, they're going to be completely blown out by an opponent. And the Packers are a really good football team as well. I'm not gonna try to sit here and deny that. But I just don't see a world where the Packers completely blow out the Vikings. I think it's going to be a relatively close game. The Vikings have played in a lot of close games, but they've also won games by significant amounts. And if you look at the close games, right, the one-score game statistic, I think the Packers game earlier in the year is a great example where it was never a one-score game. The Packers never had the ball after the Vikings scored their second touchdown, right? So after the Vikings go up 14-7, which happened after their first two drives. So as soon as possible, the Vikings took the lead, and the Packers never got the ball back with a chance to tie the game or take the lead. They had to rely on the onside kick at the end of the game, which they did not convert. You're not going to convert a lot of onside kicks, despite the fact that it's happened once and it's like worked out for the opponent against the Vikings this year. Like, that's just a once in a season event that I don't expect to happen at all this year. I would be shocked if it happens again, right? And it costs the Vikings a football game. So the Packers did not have a good game. They ended up getting a bunch of garbage time yards and garbage time touchdowns. But the Vikings intercepted Jordan Love 3 times, and I think for good reason. Jordan Love, I think has a lot of fans around the NFL. I'm not really one of them. I just don't like his play style at all, because to me, he is the type of player who will, and I mean, you can see this all over the tape. Like, literally, to avoid taking a sack, he'll just chuck the ball up in the air, and it'll be anything, right? It'll be intercepted by the Vikings 3 times in one game. It'll be knocked down with a bunch of close collisions for his receivers, or a frustrating amount of the time, it works out and the receivers make a ridiculous catch, and it becomes a big play for the Packers because he's throwing the ball, he's drifting backwards and throwing the ball off his back foot. I think that's a terrible process, and I hate it, and I don't like the way he plays quarterback. It's a little bit like the way Geno played, right? And it didn't end up working out for Geno at the end of the game in terms of the way he's checking up 50-50 balls. But Love does it to an even bigger extreme. Like, I saw the plan for Geno in a lot of cases. Like, he's either giving his guys a chance to win one-on-one, or, he sees an open player and maybe he just wasn't able to execute it in that case. For Jordan Love, it's literally a lot of the time, this guy is covered, and I'm just going to chuck the ball up to him because I don't want to get sacked. So the Vikings were able to get pretty decent pressure on Love, in my opinion, in the first game. One of the ways they did that is by attacking Rasheed Walker, specifically the left tackle. There was a really incredible rep by Jonathan Grenard where he threw Walker into Love, but also by attacking the running backs in pass protection. Josh Jacobs, who I think is a really good back, had a couple misses in pass protection. They ran stunts kind of to that area, and it was kind of effective to me. So that's the way I'd like to see them pressure Love. I put a compilation up back when the game happened, and Packers fans got all mad at me, which is kind of funny, of all the balls that Love just chucked up or was completely inaccurate throwing. I just think his level of consistency isn't any different than like a Sam Darnold. So I don't see him as a top quarterback in the game. So I'm not really worried about him. And I have a ton of respect for Matt LaFleur. I think Matt LaFleur is a phenomenal offensive coordinator. I think the Packers are going to have great route designs that attack the Vikings coverages, and they're going to get chunk plays in this game. They did that in the first game. They love running the in-breaking routes just like the Vikings offenses does. There's a really effective way to attack the Vikings by running dagger and that sort of stuff. But I just think the consistent execution isn't going to be there from Love for them to blow the Vikings out or something like that. And it's a little bit different from the Vikings defense this year is certainly different from the way they were playing last year, right? And Love had a fantastic game on, New Year's Eve against the Vikings last year. And, a lot of it to me came from the Vikings coverage pieces not being able to keep up with the receivers that they were going against. I remember there was a touchdown coming across the field where Harrison Smith was trying to follow Dontavion Wicks or something and just completely fell down. Wasn't able to do it. There were 0 blitzes where Love was able to drift back and throw off his back foot. The Vikings' main weapon last year was 0 blitzes, cover 0. They'd send the house at the quarterback, and for a lot of the season, the Bears game sticks out. That second Bears game, opposing teams just threw screens against it and didn't really have a robust plan to beat it. This year, teams have put together a robust plan to beat the Vikings cover 0 package. So the Vikings don't run it that much. They run a lot more man coverage on third down. They put, they'll run double A-gap stuff. and they'll drop funky guys. They'll send interior rushers, including like Blake Cashman and Josh Metellus, and draw up the outside linebackers into coverage and cover 3. Right? They'll confuse the heck out of you while also creating advantageous pass rush matchups against the opposing offense, right? You get a linebacker on a running back. That's an advantageous pass rush matchup. You get a stunt that springs Andrew Van Ginkel free. That worked really well in the Seahawks game, right? That's an advantageous matchup. You get a one-on-one against anybody for Jonathan Grenard. That's an advantageous matchup, right? They're not able to give chip help because of the way you presented blitz elsewhere on the defense. That's the way the Vikings are winning this year. It's a lot more sustainable to me than the high variance stuff that they were putting out last year. So I just don't think that the Packers are going to be able to consistently gash this defense unless you see a truly like lucky rabbit's foot string of luck in terms of their ability to complete, 50-50 balls or like balls that are just kind of chucked up into the air. That's not to say that I think the Vikings are going to crush the Packers or anything, or that I think that there's no chance that the Packers win the game. I just think that like it's not going to be like it was last year, and that's kind of my main takeaway. Like Jordan Love is a good quarterback. He's not a great NFL quarterback. I think he has some pretty clear deficiencies that kind of get glossed over by the impressiveness of his off-schedule play, right? Like he's got a phenomenal arm, and he doesn't take sacks, which are two really positive traits in the quarterback. But I think the reason he's not taking sacks is because he's willing to just chuck up the ball in the air, and I don't like that. I just don't think that's a very honorable way to play quarterback. So I'm gonna hate on it, I guess, until proven otherwise. But the wild card to me is on the Packers offense side of the ball. They've been an incredible rushing team, and maybe it's been a little bit overrated. If you look at some of the success rate and EPA per play stuff, they're actually not really all that much more efficient than like the Vikings are in terms of that. But like they have been willing to hand the ball off to Josh Jacobs like 20 times in a game in a way that the Vikings haven't been, and just grind the opposing team down and win the football game with the run. And I think that could be a recipe to success against the Vikings, especially if the Vikings offense struggles a little bit. The Vikings defense, I would say, has been phenomenal against the run all season, but they've been a little bit more up and down, and I think it's kind of coincided with Harrison Phillips coming up on the injury report. Like he's been getting knocked back more recently in recent weeks and hasn't been playing up to what I would consider to be his standard of play. I think he's a really phenomenal football player, but I think he has struggled a little bit recently. And across the board, I think the Vikings have a really good run defense. I mentioned Jalen Redmond, who will probably be back from this game, given that he was in concussion protocol all last week. Usually you're going to miss the first game and be able to come back from the second, but don't want to count on that. Obviously want him to take all the time he needs to come back from concussions. They're a really scary thing. Certainly don't want to minimize those. But Levi Drake Rodriguez played well in his stead. Jerry Tillery, who had kind of a down couple games in run defense, especially against the Cardinals and the Falcons, I think has been up the last couple weeks. So if he has another down game against the Packers, that could be a concern, right? Jonathan Bullard, I think, has played at a really consistent level all game. But, without Ivan Pace in there, Josh Metellus has done a couple of nice things, but he's not Ivan Pace coming forward and evading blocks and being able to play at a high level in the run defense. And they haven't really asked Jamin Davis to do that either. I think Jamin Davis can kind of take on blocks, certainly better than Josh Metellus can, and probably, do something similar to what an Ivan Pace is able to do. But Pace is a guy who's proven to be able to do that. It sounds like they're trying him in practice this week. I don't know what his status for the game is going to be, but him coming back would be absolutely phenomenal for the Vikings. So even with that wild card, if you're getting beat up front, you're getting mauled up front, and the Packers are able to run the football consistently on the Vikings this game, in a way, again, very few teams have. I would say the Cardinals did a pretty good job. I would say the Falcons did a pretty good job. I would say the Lions did a pretty good job. That's pretty much it in terms of teams that have run well on the Vikings this year. Everybody else has been actively bad. So if the Packers are able to get that going and have consistent success, that would be where I could see this game getting away from the Vikings a little bit. But overall, I think they're going to force Jordan Love to put the ball in harm's way. I would expect an interception or two at least from Jordan Love, if not more. I would say they're going to get got in a couple of ways. The Packers have really good weapons on the outside, even if none of them are like superstars, right? They've got a ton of options. They have solid offensive line. It's not as good as the Packers' offensive line in years past. I think there are ways to attack it, particularly over left tackle, and kind of what I was talking about with the stunting and the interior as well. I think struggled a little bit in our early game, right? So if you get guys like mugging the A gaps, the old Zimmer stuff, or just stunts that kind of attack with quickness against the interior, I think you're going to have some success. I don't know if you're going to bring Jordan Love down because he's freaking annoyingly impossible to bring down. Again, because half the time he just chucks the ball up to no one. But you're going to force him to rush his process. You're going to force bad throws and hopefully get some interceptions out of that. So that's kind of the defensive side of the ball. Probably a 15, somewhere between 15 and 30 points from the Packers is what I'd expect. If we flip it over to the Vikings side of the ball, I think you can expect a similar range from the Vikings offense, right? Maybe more towards the 20s in the high end. And if we're able to kind of shut the Packers offense down, we get a little bit of a nice win. But I think that the Vikings' biggest potential Achilles heel, and it's something I talked about, is the offensive line pass protection. I don't think the Packers have a particularly good defensive line, right? They've got a ton of investment into that defensive line in terms of first-round pick. Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary historically have been their best players. I don't think Kenny Clark is playing up to a standard level. Now I'm going to say that, and he's going to bull rush Garrett Bradbury back into Sam Darnold's lap like 3 times and kill the game. But which we have is, I mean, everybody on the Viking side is familiar with that, right? Like, it wouldn't shock anybody, I think, if that happened. But I think the Vikings are a lot better at pass protection than they have been when Bradbury has been killed in those situations. Rashawn Gary, I don't think, has been playing up to the level of whatever massive contract he got is. I think Jonathan Grenard is a much better player than what Rashawn Gary is, right? But he is still a threat. And like Devontae Wyatt and Lucas Van Ness and all the other first-round options that they have on that team haven't really produced at what I would consider to be a high level from an edge rusher. So I don't really expect them in base downs and one-on-one pass rush situations to be all that effective. Where I think the Packers have been really effective is blitzing linebackers and blitzing other players. You have Edgerrin Cooper, who's made a ton of plays. I think Keyshawn Nixon has something like 3 sacks. So when he comes off the edge, basically, he's unblocked, and they found really good ways to attack opposing protections. So that's interesting to me, right? Because I think Blake Brandel has struggled mentally recently. So if I was the Packers, I would attack him. And, that could be a really big issue for the Vikings in this game. I think they really need to come out with a good hot plan against blitzes or a good response plan against blitzes, which is something they've struggled with at times. Darnold took sacks in the Bears game because the Vikings didn't have an answer for like 0, right? The thing they run all the time or use constantly and force other teams to have an answer for. The Vikings didn't really respond to that all that well. So it'll be interesting to me to see how the Vikings respond in those cases. I thought the Vikings offensive line was phenomenal in the first matchup, and that's a big part of the reason they were able to jump out to such a big lead. Obviously, we've lost Christian Darrisaw since then. We've benched Ed Ingram since then, and have had Dalton Risner in, and it's been a little bit more inconsistent from pass protection. With that said, I think Sam Darnold's done a really good job navigating the pocket. I think he's done a really good job getting the ball out regardless, and I think the Vikings' talent on the outside is vastly superior to what the Packers have in the secondary. I don't have any respect for Eric Stokes. I don't think he's a good player at all. Keyshawn Nixon, I think, has legitimately played really well as a nickel. Jair Alexander, who knows if he's going to play. I don't know if he wants to play football. So I'm not worried about him. He can't cover Justin Jefferson unless they completely dedicate their game plan to stopping Justin Jefferson, and he can't cover Jordan Addison regardless, letting off that 20-yard touchdown in the first game. So I'm not really worried about him. Xavier McKinney is a phenomenal player on the back end. It sounds like they've really found something with like Evan Williams, I think, who missed the last game. At safety, they got a couple other guys, so they're pretty banged up there. But I think ultimately with the receiving talent the Vikings have on the outside, if they're able to protect Darnold, they should be able to carve up the Packers secondary. I think they should be able to run the ball fine against them. The Packers are a pretty solid run defense, but they're not, an elite run defense like the Vikings are. So I think I would expect our normal level of run, which is like somewhere between like 70 to 100 yards on somewhere between like 15 to 20 carries from Aaron Jones. And you have a couple drives that get killed because you get runs that get stopped. But generally, the run game is an engine that keeps going on the offensive side of the ball. So to me, I would look to the passing game to kind of carry the Vikings as it has all year. I think Sam Darnold should have really good success, and Kevin O'Connell should be able to design really, really good stuff against the secondary. Eric Wilson's like a starting linebacker for them. We should be able to attack the linebackers pretty successfully. I think having TJ Hockenson back will be a help, right? When we get into those third downs, obviously he's been absolutely critical in those situations since he's been back. So I do think the Vikings will be able to move the ball pretty effectively on offense, get a pretty good score going on the offensive side of the ball. And hopefully they're able to take an early lead and force the Packers into passing situations where they're not really running the ball, and then get pressure on Jordan Love and force him into mistakes rather than allowing kind of miraculous plays by the Packers to beat them. So that's certainly the path for victory for the Vikings to me. I think they're a really good football team. I do also think the Packers are a really good football team. Like, this is kind of a toss-up game overall to me. But because it's a toss-up game, I don't think there's really a lot of potential for the Vikings to be blown out and for us to be absolutely crushed like we have been in recent years against the Packers. Which, and the thing is, the results of this game are absolutely massively important. So the Vikings can take the number 1 overall seed if they win out, and the Eagles losing this week obviously gave them that opportunity. So the path to the number 1 overall seed is simple. Just beat the Packers, beat the Lions. Easy, right? Obviously not easy in either case. The problem is, and the frustrating thing is, the Vikings are 13-2. They have like the 3rd best record in the NFL. They're tied with the Lions for like the 2nd best record in the NFL, I guess I should say, right? Like, if you were to stack the teams with tiebreakers, without divisions, without conferences or whatever, the Vikings would be the number 3 ranked team in the NFL. They're currently the 5 seed in the NFC, and they very easily could fall to the 6 seed in the NFC because they could be outranked by the Packers, right? So like, Lions are the 1 seed. If they win this week and the Vikings lose to the Packers this week, and then the Vikings lose to the Lions next week, and the Packers beat the Bears, which is not hard to do, the Vikings are the 6th seed in the NFC. The Packers will have the tiebreaker over them because I believe like conference record or something. I'm not really sure. It'll be no, the division record will be tied because they've lost to the Lions twice, and it'll be 1-1 against the Vikings. But not really sure what the tiebreaker is, but I looked it up, and the Packers get the 5 seed if the Vikings and Packers both finish at 13-4. So massively critical for the Vikings to win at least one of these games. So you get the 5 seed, and you get to play the winner of the NFC South as opposed to the Rams, who you already lost to this year. So it's there's a lot of stress associated with this game, and there's a lot on the line here, is what I'm trying to say, right? It's kind of crazy that the Vikings have the opportunity to go all the way up to the 1 seed, and they have the downside of falling all the way down to the 6 seed. Now, I will say, if the Vikings lose this week, they're going to have an easier matchup against the Lions, hopefully, who will have locked up the number 1 seed and are extremely injured, so I would imagine they're not really going to be taking any chances in Week 18 with any other guys as they enter the playoffs and try to get healthy. So you would hope that the Vikings would be able to come back and win that game and grab the 5 seed regardless, but this is an absolutely critical game against the Packers, and they're a really, really good football team. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. So with all that, I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. On Blue Sky is where I've done pretty much all of my posting recently. You can find Nick Olson, my co-host, at Nick Olson NFL on Twitter. We're at Kindred Skulls on both websites. That's where we put out the episodes and stuff. Twitter and Blue Sky there. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We also post on YouTube. And so thank you all for listening. And with that, Skol Vikings.